Hey, Blazer Tales. I'm about to read a first chapter Friday of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Oh my goodness, this book is absolutely hilarious. Go check out my book talk if you have not heard it, but this book is so crazy. It is hilarious. So every chapter, there are 30 chapters, and every chapter is a different student or teacher. So the first chapter is going to be about one of the teachers. You're going to see how crazy it is, but it only gets crazier as it goes along. So let me share my screen real quick so you can you're not looking at me, you're looking at the, okay, so there's the cover of the book, and that is the author, Lewis Sacker, the same author who wrote Holes. So this is Sideways Stories from Wayside School. I'm going to read the introduction. There's an introduction, and then I'm going to read the first chapter. So introduction. This book contains 30 stories about the children and teachers at Wayside School. But before we get to them, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. Wayside School was accidentally built sideways. It was supposed to only be one story high with 30 classrooms all in a row. Instead, it is 30 stories high with one classroom on each story. The builder said he was very sorry. The children at Wayside like having a sideways school. They have an extra large playground. The children and teachers described in this book all go to class on the top floor. So there are 30 stories from the 30th story of Wayside School. It has been said that these stories are strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I told stories about you to the children at Wayside, they thought you were strange and silly. That is probably also true. Chapter 1, and chapter 1 is Miss Gorf. I think I'm saying that right. And if you see right there, there's her. There she is. Miss Gorf. Miss Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. If you children are bad, she warned, or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wriggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Miss Gorf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count, but he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Miss Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Miss Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wriggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue, and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. Hey, that isn't fair, said Todd. That isn't fair, said Todd. John was only trying to help a friend. Miss Gorf wriggled her ears, first the right one, then the left one, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. Does anyone else have an opinion? She asked. Nobody said a word. Miss Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. I do not allow crying in my classroom, said Miss Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet. And when they went home, they were too scared to even talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Miss Gorf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Miss Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, God bless you, and when Paul sneezed, Miss Gorf wriggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Terrence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Marcita tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Miss Gorf's right ear began to wriggle. Then she reached the door. Miss Gorf's left ear wiggled. Marcita opened the door and had one foot outside when Miss Gorf stuck out her tongue. Marcita became an apple. Miss Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Miss Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. All 3 Erics laughed. They were turned into apples. Miss Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terrence, Marcita, and the three Erics, Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Evans. Lewis, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Miss Gorf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Miss Gorf's desk. I must be wrong, he thought. She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples. He walked back down to the playground. The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Lewis, the yard teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Miss Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in class. She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all the children were apples. Miss Gorf was very happy. Now I can't go home, she said. I don't have to teach anymore. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. You're not going anywhere, shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Miss Gorf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed. Miss Gorf fell to the floor. The apples jumped all over her. Stop, she shouted, or I'll turn you into applesauce. But the apples didn't stop, and Miss Gorf could do nothing about it. Turn us back into children, Todd demanded. Miss Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, wiggled her ears, this time her left one first, then her right one, and turned the apples back into children. All right, Marcita said, let's go get Lewis. He'll know what to do. No, screamed Miss Gorf. I'll turn you back into apples. She wriggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, and stuck out her tongue. But Jenny held up a mirror, and Miss Gorf turned herself into an apple. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. Even though Miss Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple, but none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Lewis, the yard teacher, walked in. Where's Miss Gorf? He asked. Nobody said a word. Boy, am I hungry, said Lewis. I don't think Miss Gorf would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many. He picked up the apple, which was really Miss Gorf, shined it on his shirt, and ate it. So that's the first one. The second one is called Miss Jules, which is the new teacher that comes in. And every chapter gets crazier and crazier. So check out Sideways Stories from Wayside School. If you are at my school, I'm going to have some coloring sheets you can come and get if you want to color. I have one for every single character. So there's 30 plus the cover. So you can come get 1 or 2 of those. If you are not from my school, then tell your teacher or librarian to check it out with the links in the video and start watching. Okay, talk to you later. I'll see you in the next video, guys.